On today's Locked On Texan podcast, which sophomore are you least likely to worry about heading into year two? And Brandon K. Scott of Sports Radio 610 joins the show.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily Houston Texans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, everybody, to a new episode of the Locked On Texan podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. I am John, some sports guy Hickman. Of course, I'm joined by none other than Texans credential media member and Sports Illustrated own Cody Davis, here to discuss a couple of things with this team, man. You know, year two is a big year for a lot of the Houston Texan players, the main Houston Texan players. Derek Stingley, drafted last year. He's going to be a sophomore. Kenyon Green, he's going to be a sophomore. Christian Harris, John Mechie. John Mechie is technically a sophomore, but technically he's going to be a rookie. Damian Pierce will be a sophomore heading into this year. This is a team that I think last year was the real foundational year in terms of drafting for this franchise. And so which sophomore on this franchise are you least likely to worry about heading into year two? Cody, I actually have two. Damian Pierce and Christian Harris. Yes, and when I say Christian Harris, a lot of people are going to be shocked and, whoa, wow, Christian Harris. Listen, I'm going to give it over to you, Cody, in a minute. But I don't see a linebacker right now that's going to actually compete with Christian Harris taking his job away. Christian Harris ended the season healthy. I think Christian Harris will take command of this defense at that linebacker position this year. And I don't have to worry about health. I don't have to worry about an over-under on how many games he's going to play. And I think that with his play style as a linebacker now being under D'Amico Ryans, who will be calling plays, I think he's going to thrive this year. And so I have no worry about Christian Harris on the defensive side of the ball. And I definitely don't have a worry about Damian Pierce, even though I am the guy that said, well, he may or may not hit 1,000 yards due to the addition of Devin Singletary, but that doesn't mean I'm worried about him being an explosive, productive player. That means that we may have some snaps taken away, but I still think he's going to be Houston's running back one this year, and I still believe that he's going to be a big part of this offense heading into the 2023-24 season.
Well, here's the thing about Damian Pierce. The addition of Devin Singletary, that might keep him away from 1K, but it's definitely going to keep him healthy. And when you look at his rookie campaign, that was the only knock against Damian Pierce. He got hurt towards the end of his rookie campaign, missed the final 4 games, and I don't think that's definitely going to be a problem this year. Plus, last year, there was moments where he was the only, and I do mean only, offensive weapon for this organization. That's not going to be the problem this year because at least he's going to be taking the field with better quarterback play. But, John, sophomore sensations, you don't have to worry about them going into their second year. I don't think there's nobody from the 2021 draft class that I have the most confidence in than Jalen Petrie. Led the team in tackles last season, led the team in interceptions last season, and he was able to thrive for former head coach / former defensive coordinator Lovie Smith. The reason why I'm bringing that up, last year, there were several players, and of course, his running mate, Derek Stingley Jr., who I felt fell victim to Lovie Smith being stuck in his ways, not wanting to switch up his defense, staying too committed to the Tampa 2 defense, and that hindered a lot of the players that he trotted out there on the field. It did not matter what Lovie Smith was calling last season. Jalen Petrie made sure he went out there and played his best. Jalen Petrie went out there and showcased the potential, the promise that he showcased in Baylor. Jalen Petrie went out there and proved that outside of Steven Nelson, he might have been the second best defensive back for the Houston Texans in 2022. And he did all that while going through the learning struggles. He did all that even though he led the team in tackles. John, how many times we came on this show talking about moments where Jalen Petrie actually missed tackles? Like, there was tackles he left on the field. So, as I digress, he was phenomenal as a rookie, and he's going to get even better. And from what I have been able to see doing OTAs and mandatory minicamp, the young man has gotten even better. And by the way, this year we're going to start seeing a version of Jalen Petrie where the game is going to start slowing down. When the game slows down for him, you're going to get a better version. Another guy that I'm not worried about, and I know this is going to throw a lot of you guys for a loop, is Derek Stingley Jr. I'm not going to worry about him in year 2. He got better coaching. As I mentioned on Friday's show, he has put on some weight, and it's healthy weight, and I think that's definitely going to keep him healthy. We already know that young man has a lot of talent, a lot of potential, and I do think 2023 is going to be his breakout season, especially of how much. Especially when you consider how much people have been on, I hope I don't get in trouble for saying this, the tip of Amar Sauce Gardner.
Let me tell you why I didn't say Jalen Petrie, though. I was never worried.
That's another factor.
Let's look at the 2022 draft class. Derek Stingley didn't finish the season off due to injury. Kenyon Green, injury-riddled rookie season, and he had major issues when he played. John Mechie still hadn't played football. Christian Harris didn't play football for the Houston Texans until week 8, I believe, due to injury. So injury, unfortunately leukemia, but injury. The one guy that I never worried about, which is why I never mentioned his name, is the guy that played all 17 games. The guy that really, honestly, should have been in Pro Bowler last year, right? I said Christian Harris simply because of his injury coming into last year and the rocky start to his rookie year. Because of the play style of Dameon Pierce. That's why I said those two guys. I don't think nobody in the city of Houston is worried about Jalen Petrie. Baseball is in full swing, and there's no better place to get in on all of the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to join today. FanDuel, the official partner of the Major League Baseball and NFL.
Welcome back in, ladies and gentlemen, to Locked On Texans. And as promised, you already know the deal. We got our guy, Mr. Brandon K. Scott from Sports Radio 610, that I'm kind of surprised that we was able to get him this week because he's doing the morning show over on 610. B. Scott, how you doing? And do you have enough energy to talk with me today?
Man, Cody, appreciate y'all for having me. I always got enough time and energy for the Locked On Texans. Both my friends and co-hosts, and Cody Davis and John Hickman, and then of course the audience, the listening and viewing audience of the Locked On Texans. I'm never too big and never too busy for y'all, man. That's for sure.
Sounds good, man. Let's jump right into it. So in the first segment, John and I talked about the sophomore class and which ones we are not worried about. But B. Scott, I want to talk to you because John and myself, ever since the end of OTAs, me and him been having somewhat of a discussion about Kenyon Green. As you know, Kenyon Green, you know, his NFL career started off a little bit shaky last year, dealing with injuries and stuff. He did not have that much of a good season last year, and everyone thought that if he was to remain healthy throughout this entire offseason, he will have an opportunity to really learn and really get what he needs to get done in order to have a better sophomore season. However, as you know, we have been out there for regular practices, OTAs, mandatory mini camps, and unfortunately, Kenyon Green has not been a part of the Houston Texans as of right now because he's recovering from off-season surgery. So, B. Scott, with all of that information that I just gave, what are your thoughts about Kenyon Green going into his second season?
Yeah, I think it's a big season, and I think that goes without saying, but it still needs to be said anyway, and can't be understated that this is a big season. Obviously, for Kenyon Green himself, as you mentioned, he did not have a what you would call a successful rookie season as the starting left guard for the Texans. There are some grades out there that would tell you that Kenyon Green was, if not the worst guard in football, he was certainly among the worst guards in football. And so that's a tremendous issue for the Texans, considering that they drafted him not just to play that position, but drafted him with a first-round pick. Drafted him with a first-round pick that they got from the Deshaun Watson trade. And as we know, it was a very important thing to get back as much as they could from the Deshaun Watson trade, both in picks, number of picks, quality of picks, and then the substance of those picks themselves. So, like, what do those picks turn out to be? It would be the question. And right now, Kenyon Green is a central piece of that, a very big piece of that. And it matters very much that part of it works out for those reasons. Now, you could argue, Dameon Pierce is also the pick that they used on Dameon Pierce is also part of that trade. And so if you get a top line running back, but you're, in a later round, but your first round guard doesn't work out, does that wash? Maybe you could make that argument, but to me, it doesn't make it any less important considering where the pick was. And then also now considering the fact that they've drafted who they expect to be effectively Deshaun Watson's replacement as the franchise quarterback. I know Davis Mills has had the reins the last couple of years, but the idea with CJ Stroud being drafted number 2 overall is that he's going to be the franchise quarterback. And in order for him to be successful at that, he's going to need the offensive line to play up to his potential. And I think you feel pretty good about at least 3/5 of the offensive line playing up to its potential, but you still don't know what's going to happen at center. They drafted a rookie. We're going to see what happens with that, but we're not sure what's going to happen at center. And then with Kenyon Green, that's the open question mark. Can he both stay healthy and can he perform at the level that you need him to perform at to be worth that draft slot and to be considered your starting left guard?
B. Scott, I want to stick with the offensive line really quick, and I do want to ask about your thoughts on Scott Quisenberry, because I remember the last day of mandatory minicamp when we was out there, I had an opportunity to really study the offensive line. The right side looked really good with Titus Howard and Shaq Mason, and of course we with Larry Tunsil over there on the left side. You're really not too worried about that, but of course everybody's big concern is at center. You already know what took place last year with Justin Britt, and Scott Quisenberry is basically just thrown in there. He looked better to me, but B. Scott, what were your thoughts about Scott Quisenberry, and how would you feel if Scott Quisenberry remains the starting center for the Houston Texans throughout training camp and going into the 2023 campaign? I say that because Juice Scruggs, he has some versatility to his game, because not only is he able to play center, but he can also play left guard as well.
Yeah, I think if Scott Quisenberry is a starting center, that just means that Juice Scruggs isn't ready yet. I think similar to the reason why they drafted CJ Stroud at number 2 overall is a similar line of logic of why they were aggressive in getting Juice Scruggs as well, and why they wanted Juice Scruggs at that spot as well. So I wouldn't say that I would necessarily be surprised. It would just mean to me, the way I look at it is that CJ Stroud is more clearly and obviously ready for this moment than probably, CJ Stroud and Will Anderson are probably more clearly and obviously ready for this moment than the rest of the guys that they drafted. But that's not to rule those guys out. So that's since you asked the question, Cody, that's one of the camp battles that I'm most interested in watching and figuring out is Juice Scruggs at a level at this point to where he can close the gap between whatever the gap may be between him and Scott Quisenberry being a veteran. Would it be the worst thing in the world? Look, Scott Quisenberry wasn't great, and Scott Quisenberry is not the answer for the Texans at center for the long term. But if he turns out to be the right guy for the short term, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. I do expect Juice Scruggs to win that job sooner rather than later, though.
Wow, that's like to me, I understand what everybody's going with Juice, and I 100% agree. But to me, and then the thing is, Scott didn't have that much of a bad season. You know, he had his ups, had some downs. It was subpar at best. But I know with the evaluation that I've been given ever since mandatory minicamp, at the end of the day, that we're out there in shorts and t-shirts. So there's only so much. Almost everybody look good in shorts and t-shirts. That's why I cannot wait until they put pass on with training camp so we could truly get an understanding of that offensive line.
I would say this, Cody, with respect to Scott Quesenberry, I think that it is like he's fine for what he is, which is a rotational role player on your offensive line, like a guy who can start for you, a guy who can play for you. But when you talk about roster building, when you talk about roster construction and trying to build a winner, trying to go from the type of team where Scott Quesenberry has to start for you, think about it like that too, Cody. He was never really supposed to be the starting center to begin with. That was supposed to be Justin Britt last year, and then that didn't work out. And so, you know, like to me, it's not even a knock on Scott Quesenberry to say he's not the answer. I think he's fine for the role that he's in. It's fine to have him on the team. He adds some versatility. See, I look at it almost sort of the opposite of where Drew Scruggs, you know, depending on what his readiness is, and they'll be the ones to evaluate this, but Drew Scruggs is the one, to me, who projects out to be your starting center again, probably sooner rather than later, but at some point. And then Scott Quesenberry is the guy who's supposed to provide the versatility that can play either guard or center. So I kind of view it a little bit flipped of Drew Scruggs should be that guy, and then Scott Quesenberry is somebody that can come in there. If Kenyon Green's not getting it done, you can put Scott Quesenberry over there at left guard. If the other rookie that they drafted, kid's name is escaping me, just Jared Pat. What is the kid's name?
Oh, Jared Patterson.
Jared Patterson. If he's not ready to stay, and he also could provide you some versatility. Like I think these are guys that are meant to provide you options once your ideal options are not available to you. So ideally, Drew Scruggs wins that job, and you're looking forward with your rookie quarterback and center.
Before moving on, sticking with the sophomore class, to say the least, how much pressure, if that's the right terminology to use, is there on Derek Stingley Jr.? Because you've seen it, he has looked bigger, but in a good way. He looked faster. And it seems like from what we have been able to see as of right now, that he is getting back to the player that everybody fell in love with during those first 2 years at LSU. You know, the last year, the Liz Frank injury, rookie season, it was hard for him to get accustomed to the NFL because he was dealing with Lovie Smith's defensive scheme that was not tailored to his suit. Then he got injured towards the latter half of the season. When you look at Derek Stingley Jr., you know, how much pressure do you think is there? And does the success of Derek Stingley Jr. really determine whether or not the 2022 draft class will be a success?
Oh, man, at this point, he first of all, on the pressure point, I think that it's two-part. Both the fact that he did not stay healthy enough to play a full season, and that's been a part of his profile for the last few years now. We have not seen him fully healthy and play a full season since the year that he burst on the scene, and LSU had that tremendous season. And, you know, the big story of LSU that year was the offense, but, you know, on the other side, on that defense, they had a freshman shutdown corner in Derek Stingley. So most of us have not forgotten that, and I'll just say I am a proud card-carrying member of the Derek Stingley Jr. fan club. I think that the kid is excellent and is going to be excellent so long as he stays on the field. But to that point, my man's got to stay on the field. Like, that's the part that we can't really work around. You know, we all think that he's going to be really good, but he's got to stay on the field and actually do it and prove it. And I think if he does that, he will prove it. But to the point of the pressure that you asked about, it's twofold, or it's a two-part situation with the pressure, right? We know what it is. It's what we just talked about, the fact that he hasn't been able to stay on the field for long enough to really validate what we all, or what so many of us, I would say, think about him. And then the other side of it is the Sauce Gardner thing, the sort of elephant in the room of Sauce Gardner going to pick after him. The team that picks Derek Stingley, being the Texans here, had an opportunity to take Sauce Gardner. And so the background of the conversation is, was Derek Stingley the right one to take at that spot? Should the Texans have taken Sauce Gardner? Like those two, no matter what teams they went to, so long as they went back to back, and certainly even if they were just the top two corners of their class, which we all agreed that they were, but especially going back to back like that, no matter to which team, they were always going to be compared to each other, and then being in the same class, they were always going to be compared to each other. So that's the situation. Like him and Sauce Gardner are forever linked, and that matters now. And until Sauce Gardner if and when he falls off, that's going to be a relevant point because he comes in and he's an all-pro immediately. So I think it matters from that standpoint in terms of pressure, and then just the standpoint of just staying on the field, But in terms of like the pressure of is he as good as they say he is? Can he live up to the expectation? I don't think it's even much of a question of that for me. Like if he's out there, you'll see. And I'm actually looking forward to it and wishing the kid the best because I think there's a lot of potential there. Obviously for him individually, but what that also means for the Texans.
Welcome back in, ladies and gentlemen, to this latest installment of Locked On Texans. For those of you guys who might be wondering why John hasn't joined us today, yesterday was his birthday, and we were recording this on June 26th. So, John told me, hey, I'm not going to be recording on Monday for our Tuesday show. So, you know what, bro? Go ahead and take your rest, big dog. I got you. So happy birthday to my co-host, John Hickman, man. Please be sure to reach out to him over on Twitter, on the YouTube comments, and, just wish my boy happy birthday, B. Scott. I know you older than us, man, but we getting old, bro.
Yeah.
We getting old.
Yeah. I looked up. I know this is a Texans podcast, but I looked up and they were, they were interviewing, I think it was Brandon Miller with the from Alabama, and he's going to the Charlotte Hornets, number 2 overall pick, all of that, and he's got a story too. Y'all can look it up if y'all don't know it, but gonna be a really good basketball player. But my man is born in 2004.
And now and most of these guys, I'm pretty sure all of them, if not most of them, are football fans. We get into the point where all they know are the Houston Texans. They don't know the Houston Oilers. They don't know what was that 4 or 5 year gap where there wasn't no NFL in Houston. Like that's crazy. But
I remember last year. Whenever I think Kayvon Thibodeau was being criticized for something, and Jeff Saturday had come out. And by this point, Jeff Saturday had took the interim job with the Colts.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm old enough. It's not like Jeff Saturday is going to be a Hall of Fame player or anything, but Jeff Saturday was Peyton Manning's center.
Yes.
And I grew up watching, for better and worse, watching Peyton Manning. So I know who Jeff Saturday is. And so I thought it was ridiculous and really unwise on Kayvon Thibodeau's part to be like highlighting the fact that he didn't know this guy who I thought everybody should know if you follow football.
I know, right? Especially at that era, man.
But it was more of a sign of my age versus his age. I'm 10 years older than that kid. So maybe more than 10 years older than that kid. So that's why I'm looking at like, boy, how you don't know who Jeff Saturday is? Boy, that's Peyton Manning's center. What are you talking about?
Jeff Saturday. Jeff Saturday was the reason why Peyton Manning used to dog the Houston Texans secondary. And call me crazy, but if Peyton Manning and Jeff Saturday had an opportunity to go up against this secondary, he's still gonna put up numbers, but I don't think it's gonna be as bad as it was about 20 years ago. But B. Scott, I want to ask you your camp battles positions, but before going into that, I've been over the last week or two, I've been stuck on, I guess, my most exciting camp battle, and that's this situation that's going on at the cornerback position. Who's going to take the helm at CB number 2? Because, of course, everybody's going to say Steven Nelson had a phenomenal year for the Houston Texans last season. He was arguably the best cornerback the Texans had when you given the struggles and the injuries that Darius Stingley Jr. had to go through. Steven Nelson had a phenomenal year. I find it very ironic that when you start to hear rumblings that he wanted a contract extension, he wants more money, the Texans go out and sign Shaq Griffin, who, yes, coming off a back injury with the Jacksonville Jaguars, but we know when he is good, he is a Pro Bowl caliber cornerback. B. Scott, how do you feel about this whole Shaq versus Steven Nelson, and would you consider that a camp battle like I do?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. To me, it is the one to watch. I would say on defense for me, it is the camp battle. Like, I don't know if there's another one. Like, you could call the one at linebacker a battle. I just think it's an interesting mix of linebackers, and we'll figure out. I guess you could call that a battle, but we'll figure out how all of that plays out. It'll be an interesting combination of guys. They went out and signed what felt like 11 linebackers plus drafted total. So you got all of that going on with you. But as far as like head to head, hey, these are the two candidates that could play this role. Battles, that's the one on the defensive side. So I think all of us are going to be watching, and it'll be really interesting to see how it plays out. I think that Steven Nelson, he's at a point. Steven Nelson's got to be in his early 30s at this point, or I think he is exactly 30.
I think he's 31 or 32, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, but he's definitely at that point where, there is a clock now. Like he can see that he's probably closer to the end of his career than he is to the beginning, and he's just trying to secure the bag as best as he can. But I mean, I just don't see how at this point, after drafting Derek Stingley number 3 overall, and then the ability to go find Steven Nelson and sign him to this deal that he was signed to, and then to go and get, he's on a 2-year deal. I think it's worth, what's this deal about? I think it's a maximum value of $10 million.
Yeah,
so essentially a 2-year $10 million deal. And then they signed Shaq Griffin, I believe, less than that. So if they can go out and find Steven Nelson himself, and then Shaq Griffin, who looks like he's going to be Steven Nelson's replacement, if I'm honest with you.
Yeah, because he was running with the ones on mini camp.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about. I mean, you can make the case that Shaq Griffin's just a flat out better player than Steven Nelson. I think he's been more successful in a shorter period of time. So they have kind of. It's interesting that he would be wanting to get paid when they have, and the response would be to bring in somebody that not only could replace you, but also possibly be better than you. I'm trying to imagine how I would feel about that if I went to my employer and asked for a raise, and instead of giving it to me, they brought in somebody that does what I do and is more accomplished at it than I am. Like that would say a lot to me, So I think it should say a lot to us in terms of what they think about this battle, and the fact that if this is where Steven Nelson stands on it, he's going to have to go out there. And hell, I don't even know. Like, I don't even know if outperforming Shaq Griffin necessarily means that he for sure is going to get what he wants. Certainly, maybe he wins the job. But I mean, this is the economics of the game. Like they've already invested heavily in one side there in the top corner, right? And I think if you were to ask the Texans, they probably think that Steven Nelson is signed to a fair enough deal. Like you could call it team friendly, but I would call it fair, given he's a starting caliber cornerback, but we're not talking about an all pro type of guy or anything like that. And this is why the whole reason why you sign this type of deal is so you don't find yourself here the very next year. And I think Steven Nelson was fine last year, but I don't think he was so good to where that's the guy that you got to give the contract extension. They made those business decisions already, right? Like Shaq Mason, probably a better guard, I think, than Steven Nelson is a cornerback. And also, I would say a more perhaps important role, I think, both on the field and behind the scenes that he's going to play. Malik Collins, I think, is somebody that has actually earned that extension. And I think they were going to give it to somebody if they were going to make the choice between the two. And I'm not saying that that's what it came down to, But if you're looking at, hey, who all can I throw money at? I can't give money to everybody. You know, Titus Howard is an open question. They got to figure that situation out, right?
They better.
Yeah.
They better.
So there are guys on this team that like it's a young team, so they're going to benefit from, you know, having C.J. Stroud on his rookie contract, especially if he's good. You know, having Will Anderson on his rookie contract, and we expect him to be good. And you know, they got to find their bargains along the margins. But then with the money that they have, they got to decide who do we want to pay it to, and who are we not going to pay it to. And I think Steven Nelson is just kind of left on the outside there.
This cornerback unit is very interesting to me because Steven Nelson has 1 year left. Tavier Thomas has 1 year left. Desmond King has 1 year left.
I like all of those guys. Can I mention that just as you go?
Exactly.
Because I just said all of this.
Yeah.
It's kind of like I was kind of you know, poo-pooing a little bit, crapping on Steven Nelson. Not at all. I like Steven Nelson.
I do too.
I like Desmond King and I like Tavier Thomas. I like all of these names that you're about to list.
So, to that point you just made, I'm bringing up a question that me and John talked about last week, and I want to get your opinion. I could see a situation where Nick Caserio, out of those 4 guys, I could see a situation where Nick Caserio keeps 2 out of the 4. I know it's early right now to really evaluate Shaq Griffin, but of course you have to base your opinion on, you know, what he has been so far in his career, especially when healthy. But when you look at Griffin, Nelson, King, and Thomas, Nick Caserio keeps 2 of the 4. Who do you think those 2 should be and could be?
Yeah, you know, I think it's interesting to even consider what the futures of any of those guys. Let's put Griffin to the side for a second. The rest of the ones that you mentioned, I think it's interesting to even consider what their futures with the team could or may be, because Nick Caserio talks about thinking in 1 to 2 year windows or 2 year windows and building these teams. And those are year to year to 2 year types of players. And again, putting Shaq Griffin to the side for a second, everybody else that you mentioned has been on the team either 1 or 2 years. And for some of those guys, this is going to be year 3.
Yeah, for Thomas and King.
For Thomas and King. So, you know, at what point, you know, as much as I like them and as good as they are, at what point are you, you know, talking about the sort of just the end of their life cycle with the team? How long are they going to be with the team? Are these guys that are going to be with the team for 4 and 5 years? You know, it's hard for me to even imagine guys that were a part of the 2021 and 22 Texans finding themselves on the Texans for longer than 2 or 3 years. But if there were going to be a few, I think those would be some of them. I think, you know, it's really hard to say with Desmond King and Tavier Thomas, because you think one of them, at least one of them, has to price themselves out. Like you have to, it's hard to predict like which one is going to be able to command more money from somewhere else. You know, Nick Caserio was talking about this on Sports Radio 610 about a week or so ago with Payne and Pendergast, the show that I'm filling in on for the rest of the week, by the way. So check that out on the Odyssey app and on Sports Radio 610. But he was talking about, you know, sometimes it just doesn't work out. You know, sometimes it's got to make sense for both the player and the team. And I could see how it makes sense for the team, all of those guys, because I told you I like them all, right? So to me, they all make sense to some degree, you know, within reason. They all make sense for the Texans to bring back. But what's their situation? You know, like Desmond King and Tavier Thomas, I think at some point it's gonna be noticed that, hey, as bad as the Texans have been, those 2 guys in the slot pretty good. You know, not bad players, not bad pieces. So, you know, I think it's just going to come down to what those guys' markets are, and all of them, any and all of them would be worth keeping. If I had to predict now, let's go outside corner. I think Shaq Griffin is going to be the one that outlasts that one. So Shaq Griffin will be around longer than Steven Nelson. On the slot side, I would lean towards Desmond King just because he also provides the return element for you. But
no, I forgot about that part.
But I wouldn't sleep on Tavierre Thomas as a special teamer though, too, and just kind of as an overall like dog. The weird and interesting thing about those two, they're not exactly the same player, but they're cut from the same cloth.
Yeah.
And if I understand correctly, I think they grew up together. They know each other from Detroit, like they're boys even before this. So like they're kind of like of a similar ilk. You know what I mean? So to me, it just kind of just depends on who it makes sense for the most out of those two players, because either of them makes sense for the Texans because they've been productive.
Brandon K. Scott from Sports Radio 610. Brandon, really quick, where can our listeners follow you at on Twitter? You talked about the NBA draft, so you might as well plug in the H-Town Hoop podcast that you do with our boy Adam Spolane.
Yeah, man, me and Adam Spolane, we're gonna do an H-Town Hoops podcast episode at some point this week, so make sure y'all are subscribing to that and reviewing it and rating it and all of that. Like that really helps people with the podcast. I'm pretty sure, as y'all do with the Locked On Texans podcast, do with the H-Town Hoop podcast for myself and Adam Spolane. Yeah, man, it's exciting times. You know, the Rockets just got another couple of first-round picks. Landed a guy in Cam Whitmore that they weren't expecting to get, or at least weren't expecting to get at 20. Right,
that was a steal.
You know, they got a point guard of the future at least, so we'll see how this team is going to be made up. They're going to be introduced to the city probably by the time a lot of y'all are watching and listening to this.
Yes, sir.
So y'all check us out, man, and I'll be talking about it on Sports Radio 610 with Sean Pendergast as well from 6 to 10 a.m. Central Time. Also on the Odyssey app.
And as always, I'm your host, Cody M. Davis. Please remember to follow me on Twitter at Cody Davis _24. Once again, that's Cody COTY DAVIS _24. And be sure to check out my guy, the birthday guy, John Hickman, over
Happy
on
birthday,
Twitter
John.
at John _Hickman 12. Please be sure to like, follow, subscribe to the Locked On Texans podcast, because between myself, B. Scott, and all the Houston reporters, podcasters out there, we got a lot in store. B. Scott, I don't know about you, but I'm very excited for this upcoming season because I think I could finally look to some promising football and basketball as a reporter, unlike the last 3 years. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.